to week 3 of 2022. So this week I was able to write a lot of the boilerplate import code that I wanted to write. So what happens when we open our sulfur bottom tool and click on import is we go ahead and select all the files, and I can bring up the console to hopefully show what's going on. And what it's going to do is going to first insert all of the files into IndexedDB on our browser. So it's going to save everything so we can reference it again. And once it's done saving all the files that we're going to reference, it's going to go through and start looping for the files and looking for what I like to call entity collections. And entity collections are the list of entities used in each scene. So if there's a scene with Roller, Hiroko, or different enemies, or explosions, or bullets, it'll go ahead and read those and pre-process all the models, reading the binary from the models and storing them as JSON data. And then it'll store that in IndexedDB so we can go ahead and read that later. So once that reads, it's supposed to update the list here, but I'll go ahead and refresh and just fix that later. So what happens is once it goes through and it reads through all the entities, it'll create a list of stages where those entities were found. So Mega Man Legends will split things into different scenes inside different stages. So one of the easiest examples is in Mega Man Legends 1, outside the Cardon Forest. That's a place where you go back through several times in the game, and the game has Cardon Forest Scene 1, Scene 2, Scene 3, so after you defeat the first boss, once you go back to the Cardon Forest, there's different NPCs there. If you progress further in the game, and you go back to Cardon Forest, there's other NPCs there. And so there's 7 different scenes for the same location in the game that often contain, like, Data and Barrel will always be there, but different NPCs might be walking around there. So all that data is going to be duplicated each time. So what I kind of figured is that for each stage, we can assume that the data is unique. So what might happen is this is pretty rare in Mega Man Legends, but sometimes they swap out the textures for different enemies. So you might have a blue Hiroko and then a green Hiroko and they use the same ID. Not entirely sure about that, but I think I saw that behavior before. I could be wrong, but anyways. So we can kind of assume that inside the same scene, inside scene 2, the game's going to use all unique models, but duplicate them between scenes possibly. And then in a different scene, they might use the same ID, but they might change the texture. So the only way, we can't go too far and assume that each ID is going to be unique, but we can assume probably with high probability that inside each stage, each kind of entity is probably going to be unique, and so we can group them that way. And I think that gives us a pretty good checklist to say that, like, okay, around this stage, these enemies appear, they should have this color, and then we can go ahead and check them off, and that cuts down a little bit of the duplication for each scene, for each stage. We can just say for each stage and have a pretty small list compared to all the duplication. Mega Man Legends 2 is kind of linear in the sense that, unlike Mega Man Legends 1, where you would revisit places, locations over and over again, and things would kind of dynamically change as the story progresses, Mega Man Legends 2 is kind of linear, just kind of, you go to this dungeon, you beat it, you go to the next dungeon, you beat it, you go to the next dungeon, you beat it. There's not a lot of revisiting locations, and so I don't think a lot of the characters will be moved around or changed too much throughout the game, and I think that's why we're actually seeing a pretty small list of stages here, because everything should mostly be set in stone and things shouldn't be changing too much. So there is a little bit of logic that we need to apply in terms of staging and categorizing how we approach the characters, but I think we won't see too much overlap just based on how the game is set up. So that's what we're doing here. So we can create stages here. And once we create the category of stages, inside each stage, we can say that there's either entities, stage tiles, or textures. I think maybe we can create a complete map. It was really, really wonky with Mega Man Legends 1. So first tiles, and then maybe we'll figure out maps later, and then textures, we'll figure out how to do that in our UI. And there should be these three types. If you're wondering where Mega Man is or the common is, I think what I will do is I plan on creating a special type called common. And so when you click on common, it'll have Mega Man, it'll have the high poly uh, data models and textures that are also stored in common, and I think do it that way with just no stage styles. So if there are no stage styles, this will just be disabled. If there are no entities, which I think is probably impossible, entities will be disabled. If there are no textures, textures will be disabled. Kind of, I think, and then just kind of handle it that way. So that's it as far as the kind of data backend boilerplate boring stuff. So the thing is, the kind of thing to take home now is now that I've got the files cached, and now that I've got the models pre-processed and stored for at least a subset of the entities, the next thing is to try and click here, show the list of entities, click here, and then show the entity without a texture will be the first thing to do. And then from there, we can start going into textures and try to start pairing up the textures, dig into stage styles or whatever, and just kind of take it as we go. So that's the next thing, is try to click here, show the list of textures, or show the list of models, click on a model, parse it to a Three.js mesh, show the mesh, and then we can start debugging from there of what needs to be done from there. And I think from there, I want to start on textures, reading them, extracting them, start matching up the coordinates in the texture buffer, and there will be more content for that as I go through and do it. But for now, this kind of works surprisingly well. I was kind of taking it slow as I was going along. In terms of UI, a few small tweaks. I might add a little label here that says stage select, and maybe kind of want to come down here and say import rescan to update for any changes, and then either drop, clear, something like that. I'm not sure if this needs to be this wide. Maybe have it smaller, or maybe provide aliases for what each of the stage numbers actually are, as we gain more familiarity with what they do. And then this is probably fine here. Again, there is no vertical scroll bar, which there should be, because I can click that. There's actually more, and I did program it with the scroll bar, but it's just not responding, so it might just have a weird height thing that's going on. And then from there, start managing the Three.js context, or if I need to build a small debug feature for textures, and I'm also going to have to write a thing that's going to split these out into different components, so when I click on something, it'll give me a unique list or a unique view for each thing that I click on. Because like for entities, it's going to have like, does it have bones? Does it have animations? Does it have high, medium, low level of detail? How many textures does it have? For stage tiles, we might have some kind of properties for that. For textures, we're probably going to want to see which file it's located in, and then the height and width and stuff like that. So we should try to surface that information here, so we can kind of get a good idea of what's going on before we click on it, and start narrowing down information that way. And then we can kind of create an ID lookup list of which ID is what character. So instead of saying 0x1201, it should say roll or Hiroko or Mega Man, stuff like that. So that's it for updates for this week. This is Keon signing out, and I guess I'll see you with more updates next week.